And I think appropriately it's called Here and Now, as it's the last one. What I'm going to speak about is about two cases. I'm going to speak about Seoul and about Hong Kong. And one of them is a city that I would say I've digested, which is, in the case of Seoul, I lived there 5 years, and lived there very much as an architect. I was teaching and practicing, and somehow found it incredibly inspiring as a city to learn from. And I'll tell you why throughout this brief talk. And the second part is going to be about Hong Kong, which is definitely undigested and very raw. So it's kind of my first impressions of how I can approach this. And before I actually go into showing the slides, there's two kind of very important things. I've just realized that, contrary to the first lecture, all my slides have buildings and no people. So I was thinking, okay, this is quite interesting. I think there's maybe 2 or 3 people in 80 slides, symptomatic of how I look at things. And the second thing is that, and it's I think very controversial position that I take, is that there are 2 aspects of kind of the person I am. One is an architect who believes that somehow there's a source of inspiration in the city, but that source of inspiration is research and it's not directly translated into design. I think we need to look, we don't need to copy, and sometimes we even got to be careful using metaphors. So I use what I see is not immediately translated into designs, it's kind of absorbed and digested. But definitely I don't want to say that I kind of use it as a design tool. I'm going to show you, just as an introduction, 3 cities that I've recently visited. This is in the last 4 or 5 months. And somehow, and it's a rather paradoxical statement, I'm very interested in the generic. I'm interested in the generic because through the generic, if you go that deeper level that we were talking this morning when I introduced, there are narratives. Those narratives I call Here and Now. And I think this is the only person I have in my slide. And it is those narratives that interest me, and to find out, and I think I'm going to try and show you in this brief talk, what's behind this. And in this case, I didn't have enough time. This is an area of Beijing called Kaohsiung, where Ai Weiwei had his office. I didn't have enough time to explore, but I try and sort of explore behind. And this is another city that I've been recently visiting a few times, is Guangzhou, and this is the view from my hotel. And I always wake up and I say, how the hell am I going to understand this? This is background, and that's all I can understand from it. But once you kind of go closer to it, you start to kind of understanding these stories. And then when people who actually know the place start explaining you these stories, there's incredible richness to how these, in this case, urban villages develop. And recently I was in a conference at Leeds, and somehow this isn't the generic that we kind of used to see, but it's a form of generic. It's just simply walking along the street, seeing this very interesting building, and this backdrop to this post-industrialist landscape, and then finding this inside, kind of, Norman Foster 150 years ago. One of the ways that, although I've got 100 slides and they're all photographs, one of the ways I think that is very important, and very important for the sort of next generation of architects, is not to forget how to look. And in a kind of anachronistic way, I draw. It's about the only thing I can do as an architect is draw. I'm not very good at anything else. But it's through drawing that I kind of understand space. This is a building that actually Peter Carl introduced me to some 15 years ago, and I revisited this summer. And I think it's impossible to understand this Castel Vecchio in Verona by Capuscata. And it's impossible to understand the layers, the spatial complexity and layers of this building without drawing it in my mind. And then also we're running a course with some of the students that are here, looking at the residual spaces and somehow the mundane Hong Kong. And again, part of what we do is we draw. And I think there's a deeper level of understanding when you go through that process of actually trying to understand through the hand and the mind coordination. The first digested research that I want to show you is this book, and it relates to my sort of 5 years in Seoul and a project that I did with a very young photographer in Seoul. And it's basically a taxonomy of 10 typologies of everyday buildings, and I'll show you a couple of instances of that. And this is what the book looks like. And in the second part, it's kind of, the research is under the title called Urban Pause. But it's really this fascination when I've come to this city, obviously mesmerized by how it works and its density, but I just find myself loving this kind of in-between, the interstitial, the infrastructure, and completely attracted to that. So together with 13, 14 students this semester, we've simply been going to these sites, and I'm going to show you some of the sites that we've been to, and some attempts on my part that are very kind of weak still, but how this could be interpreted. Earlier this year there was also an exhibition, and this is part of an exhibition done by the University of Southern California, which was looking at China in flux, mapping the middle zone, and they asked me if I wanted to contribute with something about Hong Kong, so we took our research to there. I don't want to use this picture too much, but for the people who weren't here this morning, I think this embodies everything, and this kind of was an epiphany for me because it was a starting point of my love affair with Seoul. And you can't believe when I found this how inspired I was, because it kind of was everything that I was always thinking about and actually working. So, you know, it's an underground line, it's in operation, it's organic farmers selling their local products on a subway line. And this actually moves and it goes through the city. And to me, you know, I know very dynamic cities in the world, but I don't know any other that could do something like this. And this came about when talking to a lot of professors and architects in Korea, when they were actually, you know, we were talking about the city, we were talking about what architecture is in Korea, and always this paradigm came, and it's incredibly beautiful. It's the hanok, it's the traditional Korean house. It's right, this example is right in the center of Seoul. But somehow, completely, in my opinion, kind of misses the richness of the urban fabric that exists. I've got nothing against this, it's incredibly beautiful, and they use the word harmony with nature, and I agree, but somehow it doesn't, and the people who've been to Seoul, doesn't reflect the reality. And there's another trend of architects in Seoul that then say, okay, take me to the best buildings, and they will take you probably to this building, which is the recent building by Zaha Hadid. And I must admit, it's the best Zaha Hadid building I've ever seen in my career. And compare this to the way it's being built in Guangzhou, it's incredible. The level of technology that Samsung has kind of achieved to make these panels is incredible. And then there's the next generation of young architects, this is mass studios, that are constantly speculating about what the future of Seoul could be. And again, very interesting, but as we say in England, not my cup of tea. And this is what I was trying to talk about. And I saw this every day, and this is, you know, very, very common situation. Is you see these buildings, and you see them, and you just don't look at them. And what's interesting to me is what sort of architecture is behind this. First of all, you know, there is no facade anymore. It becomes an X-ray. Once you can read Korean, you can use this, and you can operate through it. And I find this incredibly inspiring. So this is literally my team, and you've got to add a small car. And so the three of us, with absolutely no funding, because it's very difficult to get funding, for these kind of projects from the Korean government. So we decided, okay, we just take it ourselves. There's the young photographer, there's a young student of mine, and simply over a year, and we were very kind of, in a way we had a very strict order. We would go every Thursday for the whole day. So I wanted to start with the first typology, which is really maybe the most important, is about churches. And I think a little brief statistic would be kind of interesting. Rome is a city of 2.5 million people, I think, at the moment. And according to the latest Google searches that I could do, it has roughly about 1,000 churches in operation. Seoul has 12.5 million people and has 48,000 Christian churches. 48,000 Christian churches. So the figures are just outstanding. It's just incredible the number of churches that you have. And this is what the churches are like. You see them. They look sort of a little bit out of place. They're built in this style, very much a Germanic medieval style. And once you ask these questions, why would they choose this style? It's very much because the pastor who comes back from his training was probably trained in Germany or in Northern Europe, and these are the sort of pictures that come back. So these are given to an architect. But what happens is not so much the building itself, it's how the building mutates to its surrounding. And what interests me is that, this is not a very theoretical kind of way of looking at things, but it blurs. It becomes part of the city and somehow doesn't look out of place. And then, so what was interesting to me is to actually go to these buildings and sort of scratch a little bit deeper. And so we went around, we tried to get in, and we discovered that the actual hall is a 2,500 hall, is underground, which is extremely interesting. And I was constantly fascinated by this idea of the bell tower, we call it in Italian the campanile, you know. And of course, there are no bells, you know, there are no bells in Seoul anymore, or ever have been. So then I was thinking, well, is this purely a symbol? Is this purely something that is a leftover symbol so people know it's a Christian church? Well, no, it's a car park. And it's fully in operation. So Sunday, when you can't park and you need to go to church, you come here, there's a small queue, you put your car into the vertical tower, and you go in. And this, in a way, was a sort of similar epiphany that I had to what I was seeing in the underground. You know, I couldn't conceive this. I couldn't imagine of how this you could design it. Then, of course, there's an issue of scale. Here you can see kind of this church built in 1984. Incredibly massive piece of architecture. Here you can see it close by. Again, stylistic references is obvious, but what interests me is that once you go and look at the building, and you see the cross-section of the program, it's incredibly fertile ground. This is a community center, this is job training, this is English learning, this is where children can go after school, this has, you know, cooking classes, this is where you can go and get food if you don't have it. It's working on many, many levels. And I think this is incredibly interesting. There's a whole new generation of churches being built. Actually, when you go to Seoul, you'll see, you know, it's maybe the typology that gets built the most in terms of what you can see, because usually they're quite flashy. And this is what I call the office church, built 2 years ago in the most expensive area of Gangnam, which is sort of the kind of upper market Seoul. And you can see again, there's the reference to the campanile. Here, the campanile is symbolic. And again, what interests me is that the hall is below ground. So usually you would have a car park below ground, but they choose to put the hall. And all these are services that the churches give. You have the tower typology. So you can see now the hall is above ground on the left, the tower, and you have the egg. The egg is not empty, it's half empty, and then you have the services above ground. You have what I call the invisible churches, the churches that you can't see during the day. And you can only see them at night. And you can see them at night because of these two crosses. So the crosses light up and then you're completely aware. But during the day, you don't really realize it. And you have an incredible array of Gothic churches, neo-Gothic churches. And what strikes me is the craftsmanship. This is not just a mere copy, it's incredibly expensive stone. And all privately paid. So this is a lot of money behind this. You have Gothic glass churches. And then you have, and probably one of my favorite architects in Korea, Kim Soo-gun, who built this church in 1984, a Presbyterian church. And this is a really interesting, I find, project in terms of design. The outer shell is brick, but the inside is all cast concrete, and all those sort of fingers that you see at the top are actually light wells to let light inside. And you who've been to Seoul or read about Seoul know about apartments and this kind of world of Hilbert-Simon that is actually built. And I think many people are much more kind of knowledgeable than me on the subject, but what interests me about apartments is the context, this kind of context that they're situated in. And I was talking some years back, I think a year or two back, to hear about this picture, and he said, you photoshopped that, that's not real. They work in clusters, the typology work in clusters, they override the existing, and this relationship of how they kind of how they sort of enter neighborhoods, how they deal with topography, is how they grow in areas. New typologies that are existing, so this is built after 2000. You can imagine the real estate value of these. And then this is in Songdo, in the new towns. And again, it's all based on this very high technology that the Koreans kind of are now exporting to many countries worldwide. And they've really become extremely efficient at building these projects. Then the third and final topic about Seoul is urban tattoos. And again, it's that picture that I was showing you before and what that picture creates. And I think it's not only me who's not very good at reading Hangul, but it's also Koreans as well. It's this constant sense of deja vu, that the buildings are kind of covered in these tattoos, and you really kind of find it difficult to situate where you are. This is an example of before, and these are the signs. This is Noreban, this is a place where you go and drink, and the whole architecture behind these signs. And many areas, of course, want to clean this up. So this is an area, sort of a gentrified area, but I really don't know if this is any better or any worse. And of course, how they completely transform the night life. Aware that we're also, at the end of the day, I'm very tired, I'm going to pass on to the undigested stuff, and this is related to Hong Kong. So it's in a funny kind of way. I was trying to think of what kind of research on the city could I do in Hong Kong that hasn't been done before, and more or less everything has already been done. So I said, well, let me go to where I'm attracted the most, and that's infrastructure. So I find myself attracted to this infrastructure. This is a housing estate called Meifu. And again, I find something extremely interesting. It's 99 towers together, built in the late 1960s. It's more or less 100,000 people live in this area, and it's completely bisected by this highway. And what's interesting is that rather than being a redundant urban space, the highway becomes the market. And this is the wet market, completely in operation, and you can just imagine how much it's thriving, given that it's got 100,000 people, next door to it. And then we went to visit, and also be with my students here. And this building is designed by a famous architect, Dennis Lau, here in Hong Kong. And I'm fascinated again by the logistics of Hong Kong, what comes in and what goes out, and the buildings that kind of deal with that. So what you see here are buildings with ramps, and these are no kind of small ramps. These are ramps that take trucks and articulated lorries. So we go there, we visit it with our students, and you can kind of see here the operation. And you've got to think that the radius has got to do with an articulated truck. So the goods come in from the shits, downloaded, go into these buildings, and then distributed, and the truck takes them away. And somehow by accident, we found this space. And this is what I call a residual space. But when you go there, it's absolutely unbelievable. And my students and I, we just couldn't believe what we'd found. This is simply the residual space of the ramp left over, and the architect decides to put some circles in. Then you have these impossible topographies, and this is Pofulam near Hong Kong U. And again, we've been there, and you see this infrastructure that has to deal with ramps that would never be allowed in any other city, and certainly now would not be allowed. And how they get transformed, this is during the recent Hong Kong-China match, how they get populated and become a kind of a setting for a public event. The whole issue of the coastline and how infrastructure has gone and positioned itself on the coastline, and the spaces this coastline offers, and the incredible potential that such a space has. Again, this is an existing building, it's a car park, and this is in Mongkok, or close to Yanmatei, where the building penetrates and pierces and goes through the other side. Things that are very kind of incredible for me just to kind of understand and kind of absorb. Or the underpassage, this is called Causeway Bay, and how a whole world of bus stop and local people and local customs happen, in possibly the worst conditions and the worst pollution I've ever kind of experienced. There's also a lot of abandoned infrastructure. This is all the incredibly beautiful concrete work for the old airport. Now it's abandoned, and this infrastructure is just left empty. So the road underneath is working, and the road on top is just left obsolete. Abandoned fishing villages, abandoned villages. This is a site that a student of mine is doing a project on, a thesis project. And these villages just abandoned and sort of waiting. And then the kind of what I call the mitigating structures. These structures that obviously have to accommodate sort of rules. So these roads that you see are built because you need a fire engine to get to the building. So the building has to be on land because the foundations are cheaper, and therefore the road can be sacrificed and is put as an extension. Oh my God, what an extension. And then you can see whole kind of areas. This is a school just down the road from the previous one. And even on the micro scale, how this temple is coexisting. And obviously, I think the temple was there first, then the tree is growing, and then you have to have the structure because the tree will actually destroy the temple. And then this is in Central, very close to where Tommy was this morning, explaining his work. And you have Robinson Road, these incredible, what I call cathedral spaces of concrete, simply mitigating with the landscape. There's two layers to everything. There's a layer above for the road, there's a layer below for the pedestrians, and here you can see it from on top. So it's literally that jungle there is the space that I was showing you before. So that the cathedral space I was mentioning is just in between that space here. And then very generic spaces that are kind of domesticated, forgotten spaces. And then of course people have kind of realized that there's potential here, so architects like Barry Ho are starting to put programs in here, but still I don't think that they see the full potential of what can be done. And in between condition in Tai Ho, And then, of course, I'm trying to digest this, and I do a lot of the digesting through drawing. And that's where we are at the moment, that we're starting to digest it. I've actually realized that the scale has to be a lot smaller than I'm thinking about. I was thinking about a bigger scale of operation. So here you can see some of the speculations in terms of design that I was thinking, but I think I show it to you as a kind of a cul-de-sac because it's definitely not the right direction, but I think you've got to speculate. It's very important as a designer to speculate in order to know that you're going in the wrong direction. So this is Kuntong. This is an area that I showed you in Bori Bay on the water, and this is Upofulan, but I realize it's